Anya Outwits the King, from a Russian folktale, retold by Muriel Mandel, illustrated by Helise Wen. Bratislav was a poor shoemaker. He was very proud of his daughter Anya. He boasted about her all of the time. "My daughter is wiser than the king's advisers, perhaps even wiser than the king," he told all who would listen. Eventually, the king heard about Bratislav's boasting. He ordered him to the palace. "You dare say such a thing?" the king roared angrily. "A girl who is wiser than my advisers? Wiser than me?" "It is true," Bratislav said, trembling. The king whispered to a servant. The servant left and returned with 30 eggs. "If your daughter is as wise as you say," the king said, "tell her to hatch chicks from these eggs. I'll give you a bag of gold if she succeeds, but come back without the chicks, and you will be banished for a year." The terrified shoemaker took the eggs to his daughter. Anya looked at them and laughed. "These eggs could never be hatched, father. They are boiled." "Then I will be banished," Bratislav moaned. "Don't worry," Anya said. She boiled some beans and took them to her father. The next day, Bratislav waited until he saw the king's carriage traveling down the road. He then went outside and began planting the cooked beans in his garden. The king watched Bratislav and smiled. "Why are you planting boiled beans?" the king said. "They won't grow." "Sire, my daughter says we can indeed grow boiled beans," Bratislav said, "especially if you, the king, can command chicks to be hatched from boiled eggs." The king was surprised that the girl responded to his challenge in such a smart way. He gave Bratislav a bag of gold to reward the girl's clever thinking. The king wanted to outsmart the girl. He handed Bratislav a small square of cloth. "I'll give you more gold if your daughter makes sails for a large ship from these few inches of cloth," the king said. "She must complete the task within a week. If not, you'll be banished for 5 years. "What do we do now?" Bratislav moaned. "Don't worry," Anya said. "It will be fine." The next day, Anya gave her father a small piece of wood. "Tell the king that I will gladly make the sails," she said. "But first, he must use this wood to make a large ship. I will then fit the sails onto that ship." The king was astonished at Anya's daring response. He realized the girl must be as clever as her father had boasted. The king handed Bratislav a cup. "Tell Anya to empty the water out of the ocean with this cup. If she succeeds, I'll marry her. If she fails, you'll be banished forever." The shoemaker went home and told Anya of the latest impossible task. "Bid me farewell, my good daughter," Bratislav said sadly. "The king says he'll marry me?" Anya asked. She was thrilled. "Trust me, father. You won't lose your home, but you might lose your daughter." The next day, she gave her father several ropes. "Tell the king I'll empty the ocean," she said. "But first, he has to use these ropes to tie up all the rivers that flow into the ocean." Bratislav delivered Anya's message. The king then asked to meet the girl. She was plainly dressed, but stood tall and fearless. He saw, too, that she had a bright smile. Her eyes were strong and clear. Was she really the one who had sent the witty messages, he asked himself. The king decided to give her one last test. "What sound can travel the farthest?" he asked the maiden. "Thunder," Anya answered. "It can be heard in both heaven and earth. Your royal command also travels far. It goes around the world on the lips of your subjects." The king was now convinced. He knew that Anya would be a queen worthy of the throne, and Anya was clever enough to make sure that they lived happily ever after.
Ashipattle and the Giant Sea Monster. From a Scottish folktale, retold by Muriel Mandel, Illustrated by Brian T. Jones. Long ago, a giant monster known as the Meester Stoorworm rose out of the sea. It was said that the stoorworm's body stretched halfway around the world, that its one eye was as red as fire, that its breath was poison to all living things. Every day it moved closer to Scotland. The King of Scotland asked the sorcerer for help. "You must give your only daughter, Princess Gemlovely, to the stoorworm," said the sorcerer. "Only then will it leave." The king went pale. Princess Gemlovely was kind, gentle, and loved by everyone. "Is that the only way to save my people?" the king asked. "It is the only way," the sorcerer said. The king knew the sorcerer was serious, but he wasn't ready to give up yet. The king sent a message to all of Scotland. The man who can kill the Meester Stoorworm will get half of the kingdom, and Princess Gemlovely as his bride. The king was excited when 36 men came forward. But as soon as they saw the monster, they all ran away. The king was sad. He knew the princess had to be offered up to the stoorworm. There was great grief throughout the land. On the day before the princess would be offered to the monster, a farm boy went to the seashore. His name was Ashipattle. All his life, Ashipattle wanted to be a great hero. He was determined to defeat the stoorworm and save Princess Gemlovely. Ashipattle borrowed a small boat. He loaded a bucket of burning coals into it and rowed toward the stoorworm. At dawn, the monster awoke. He slowly opened his giant jaws in a yawn. A great flood of water rushed into his open mouth. The boat and Ashipattle were swept in. Ashipattle was carried down the stoorworm's throat. When the boat finally stopped, he stepped out into a pool of shallow water deep inside the monster. Ashipattle climbed through the monster's body to the beating heart. He carried his knife and the bucket of hot coals. Ashipattle used his knife to carve a hole in the monster's heart. He dumped the coals into the hole. Then he blew and blew until the fire became a huge blaze. Ashipattle ran back to the boat and jumped inside. The stoorworm started to twist in agony as the fire burned in its heart. The smoke caused the monster to give a mighty cough. Ashipattle's boat flew out of the stoorworm's throat and back into the sea. He quickly rowed to shore. Ashipattle stood on the shore with the king, the princess, and many others. They watched the monster fling its tail high into the air. They thought its tail would strike the sun. The stoorworm then fell into the sea with such force that its teeth flew out of its mouth. Finally, the monster curled up and died. Some say the stoorworm's teeth became the islands north of Scotland. Others claim its great body became the country of Iceland. The king threw a big party in honor of Ashipattle's victory. Ashipattle had become a great hero. Ashipattle and the princess were soon married, and they lived happily ever after.
Atalanta and the Golden Apples, from a Greek myth, retold by Muriel Mandel, illustrated by Natasha Ringor. Atalanta was a strong and beautiful woman. She was a great hunter, and she could run faster than any man or animal alive. Hippas was a friend of Atalanta's. He loved her. One day, he asked her to marry him. "I will only marry you if you can beat me in a running race," she said. Hippas knew he could not run faster than Atalanta, so he prayed to Aphrodite, the goddess of love. Aphrodite agreed to help him. She gave him 3 golden apples. "During the race, throw these apples behind you," Aphrodite told him. Hippas then went to race Atalanta. "You will not win," he said. "I love you so much that I will win." Atalanta smiled at her friend. The pair went to the starting line. The race began. They started off running side by side. Atalanta let him keep up with her. After a mile, Hippas dropped one of the golden apples. Atalanta stopped to pick up the apple. She bit into the apple and watched as her friend kept running. "Hippas has always been a good friend," she thought. Then she ran to catch up with him. Hippas threw down the second apple. The first was so tasty that Atalanta picked up the second one. "And Hippas is very funny," she thought. Hippas raced on. Then Hippas threw the third apple to the side of the road. Atalanta followed that apple too. As she bent down to pick it up, she thought, "He would be a good husband." Atalanta looked up just in time to see Hippas cross the finish line. She laughed when she saw Hippas leap into the air. At that moment, Atalanta knew she loved Hippas too. With the help of Aphrodite's golden apples, Hippas had won the race, and he had won Atalanta's heart. Atalanta gladly married Hippas. They lived happily ever after.